Kia ora tato. My name is Leah Crowe. I am a PhD student at the University of Otago. I study the bottlenose dolphins in Fiordland. The bottlenose dolphins in Fiordland are on the IUCN Red List. That was something that Thomas and Ursula talked about. They are considered critically endangered because they are small populations in pretty geographically isolated places. And so I'm talking to you today some preliminary results on my PhD, 2 chapters of them. So it's still in progress, so bear with me with that. The first chapter I'm going to talk about is a size and growth study. And so the reason we worry about size and growth is that it's kind of a metric of their health. So are they growing big enough? Are they achieving reproductive size when we expect them to? How does that change over time? So this is kind of a first stab at doing this in a more comprehensive way. And for free-swimming large animals in the ocean, it's pretty challenging to measure them. So the ways I'll talk more about how we get around that. But in the past, there have been some previous attempts at measuring bottlenose dolphins in Fiordland. Some of that has to do with measuring stranded animals. That's pretty straightforward. An animal is on the beach, either dead or alive, and it's right there. You can measure it. There's also been some attempts with vessel-mounted systems, so either some stereophotogrammetry off of a sailboat or some laser photogrammetry off of using a laser to tell you how far you are from the object, and then you can use math to interpolate the size of the animal. So even without those kinds of attempts to measure animals, anyone that's been around Fiordland bottlenose dolphins knows that they're big. They're pretty chunky animals. They're about 3 meters, and you can tell that just by being in a small boat or, just by your eye. But for science, we need to be a little bit more quantitative about that, so that's the approach we're taking here. So to do this, we used a overhead aerial system, a drone. So this is an off-the-market, Inspire drone with a custom-added laser altimeter. So the laser is what tells us the really precise altitude that we're flying at. And so again, using math, the distance from the photo that was, or the video that was taken, we can say how big the creature was in the image. And so we fly at about 10 meters. Really aiming at more than 10. Most of the time it's closer to 15. And I'm taking 4K video, and I'll talk more about what we do to process the video. But the 2 study sites are the Pattaya Doubtful Complex as well as the Tamatea Dusky Sound Complex. Within the Pattaya Complex, there's a population of about 60 animals that use that space. In the Tamatea Dusky Complex, there's about 120. So we've been studying at least these 2 populations since the doubtful population since 1990, the Tamatea Dusky population since 2006. So we have this huge catalog of their marks, mostly on their dorsal fin. For this study, I need marks on the top of their body. So we use their dorsal fin to kind of make sense of our longitudinal data that we've been collecting over the many years, but I'm now extending that into using marks on their oblique sides of their body, so basically from their face down to their tail. So in this photo, you can see how this animal on top, her name's Scratchy. This is how I'm matching her into this dorsal view from the drone image, and then that's her calf next to her, Shivers, that we can match with those very minute marks. So this is kind of a labor-intensive process. So then we can take these images, which are screen grabs from the video, and I'm looking for the time when the dolphin is the most extended at the surface, where the dorsal fin and the blowhole are at the surface. And so then we use this custom software, and we can make all these measurements. So in that photo on the right, you can see there's total length from nose to tail. There's widths at different intervals along the animal's body. There's a length from the dorsal fin to the blowhole, and then fluke width. So altogether, measured over 1,200 photographs of 143 individuals, and that's either the blowhole to dorsal length or the total length. And so there's some numbers of the number of individuals from each of those pods that were able to be measured. Okay, so then I did some math and statistics. So if anyone wants to talk more about hierarchical multivariate Bayesian modeling, I'll save that for the coffee break. But this is fitted with a von Bertalanffy curve. So this is basically saying for each individual in each of these pods, using lengths of their bloat hole to dorsal fin and their total length, how do these variables kind of relate together, and what does that say about their rate of growth and their total potential length over their lifetime? So we can see, compared to the two pods, comparing the two, pretty similar total length, somewhere average around 3 meters for both pods. But you can see there is some variability in individuals. Some individuals are just going to be a little bit shorter. Some individuals are going to be quite a bit bigger. So to look a little bit closer, and the other thing is that dolphins put a lot of energy into their bodies to grow up until they reach sexual maturity. And then at that point, that's when they put a lot of the energy into actually reproducing. So from our long-term photo identification study, we've seen females first have a calf at around 10 years old. And if you look at these plots here, where the curve is starting to level out, where we're seeing the asymptotic, the maximum length, so the age at maturity is around 10. So that kind of lines up with what we've been observing over the course of our studies. And so this is a similar graph, but what I've done is teased out their potential birth year. So you can see how the different individuals, based on when they were born, if there's any kind of trends going on with how long or how big they're expected to grow. So the gray lines are actually animals where we did not observe them in their birth year. We first observed them already not as a calf. So their birth year is estimated here based on age of first having a calf. And the point here is that with the animals that we first measured with the drone approach, we have way more confidence about their total maximum potential length because we've measured them now at that stage. But for the younger animals, there's a little bit more uncertainty about what total length they will grow up to be. There is also a question of, can you use this kind of size, this total length, to say anything about assigning sex, so whether it's a male or a female? And we do have quite a few individuals in both pods where we're not sure what sex they are yet, so the way we assign that is either by seeing the animal upside down, having a good look at the genital slit, or seeing if it has an associated calf, so if it's actually rearing young. But here we see actually the largest female in this, the largest animal that I measured during the study was a female, SN9, if anyone knows her. And that, I'm pretty convinced that is not like a mistake. I've measured her pretty big a couple of times at over different sampling points. So I think she's just a remarkably large dolphin. So you can see how it's not discrete categories into what is a male and what is a female as far as total length. And that's pretty consistent with populations around the world too, where there doesn't seem to be a very clear female length and a very clear male length. So again, revisiting this idea that the whole point of assessing this is that size and growth can give us some insight into population health, and changes to growth or reproductive potential over time can help us assess population dynamics. So because these are small populations, though, these processes are quite subtle. So, are they thriving? Are they surviving? So far, they're definitely surviving, some of them. But we do have potential stressors from human activity, both in terms of use of the area, but also large-scale ecosystem pressures, like things like climate change and heat waves that affect, forage, and then that has an impact on growth potential. So it's thinking about those kinds of things, and continued measurement efforts can help in the future, can help contextualize these findings as we revisit how some of these animals that were measured in my study as young animals, as they grow throughout time, what do they end up, how big do they end up growing? So that will help us improve our model of these kinds of data. And again, they are as big as some other dolphins in other extreme environments, like up in Scotland. So that's pretty cool. Okay, I don't have a lot of time for this next part, which is the other part of my thesis, which is about acoustic monitoring. So I'm going to try and run through this. But essentially, in Fiordland, there are 3 recognized subpopulations of bottlenose dolphins. I talked about the Dolphin pod, the dusky pod. There's also northern pod, which is in that blue area in the top fjords. And then there's a southern population that ranges between some of the southern fjords, as well as Rackiora, and even around to Dunedin. And a little insider information is that some of them are actually seen around Akaroa. So there's this like pretty extensive transient crew that roams the area. But so this here is the paper that informed the IUCN critically endangered status for Fiordland Bottlenose dolphins. And you can see that there are 4 fjords on here that are not recognized as part of their range. And yet there have been some opportunistic sightings of dolphins from the doubtful pod, at least, since 2009. So this study is aiming to quantify how often are these other fjords being used, who's using them, what does that say about habitat of these different pods and how they interact with the ecosystem, how do they interact with each other. So we set out some acoustic monitoring gear. You can see the red shapes are the locations where we put out these acoustic gear. They were out in February 2022. They have all been removed from the ocean as part of my study, but look at Jenny's study later to hear more about her stuff in Tamatea. But they came out of the water finally in January this year, so it's almost about 2 years of listening for dolphins. We have 2 approaches. The sound trap is listening to broad frequency sound, so we can look at things like whistles, burst pulses, social calls. The F-pod is a different kind of gear that really only picks up on echolocation clicks, so impulsive clicks. This is basically what I look at for a couple of hours every day, which is seeing if there have been, we use a detector, an AI automated algorithm detector to help us with this, to tease out some of these things, and I go in and validate it. So this is what dolphins look like. Their sound looks like anyway, whistles. Okay, so these are preliminary results, and this is kind of a busy graph, and we have 2.5 minutes. So basically there's a lot of data in the yellow that I still need to validate. The stuff in the red is saying that there's had a different sampling cycle, so basically to conserve battery, we had it running, so we record for 15 minutes, turn off for 15 minutes, repeat cycle. The black or the gray is when the batteries died or we didn't have a piece of equipment in, and the green/blue are days where we had detected dolphin presence. So quick and dirty stats is that Taipotopo Charles Sound had almost 50% of days had positive dolphin detections, followed by the space within the marine reserve in Tamatea. Dag Sound hanging in there, 25% of days. So again, that's just an example of that's a fjord that is not part of their habitat that seems to have a pretty good dolphin presence. And something too to say about acoustics is that these are detected acoustics presence, which mean that they need the dolphin to be making a sound in the radius of my equipment and in order to be able to detect it. So that's, if you think about it, it's not really that big of a space, but from that we can still get a lot of information. So yeah, results are preliminary and ongoing, but dolphins have been detected on every recorder in all seasons. A really interesting thing though, at the marine reserve compared to the, so we had one piece of equipment in the Five Fingers Marine Reserve, one outside of Anchor, really much higher dolphin detection within the marine reserve. So we're really intrigued by that. And we did a little study where we dual deployed an F-pod and a sound trap in DAG to see if the recorders had any kind of differences, and they seem to have a really similar, show similar trends on a daily scale, but when we start looking a little finer, it's a little bit different. Okay, this is really quickly though. There have been photographed sightings of dolphins in these other fjords since 2009. So you can see these are the doubtful pod. This is how many of them have been seen in other spaces besides the doubtful complex. And as far as the dusky pod, this is what's going on too. So these are opportunistic sightings. When we go in to change the batteries, we look around, we take photos if we encounter dolphins. We have seen these pods in other places. So the implications, they've been sighted and acoustically detected in all these 4 fjords. At this stage, we're not rigorously discriminating on dolphin species in the acoustics. We can talk more about that at coffee. Resident pods, they're likely using a larger habitat than are currently recognized. So that means they're exposed to threats inside and outside the complexes. They also have access to resources inside and outside the complexes. And what does this mean about genetic diversity and what other populations they're interacting with? So this warrants some reconsideration of habitat management approach. A lot of people, including people in this room, helped me change batteries and access these remote spaces. So I definitely don't want to end my talk without saying thank you very much for having me on board. Yeah, thanks.